Gasping for air, she pushes her exhausted body forward through the darkness. Panting heavily, she struggles to catch her breath as reality finally sets in. Uttering a final farewell, she permanently severs the ties to her old life. Declaring the absolute end of her former self, she abruptly abandons her prestigious role as the Duke's eldest daughter. This is the definitive story of how a former ducal daughter cast aside her chains and finally became her true self. Shattering the silence, Crown Prince Leonis boldly demands the immediate dissolution of his engagement to Rosalind. 17-year-old Lady Rosalind freezes in stunned silence as the sudden devastating declaration hits her. Leonis stares her down with absolute authority, demanding to know if she understands his unyielding decision. Shocked and visibly confused, Rosalind scrambles to understand the sudden meaning behind this betrayal. Desperate Baroness Amy begs for forgiveness, tearfully confessing that the two of them have fallen madly in love. Leonis cruelly dismisses their lifelong engagement as a mere political arrangement, completely shielding Amy from any trace of blame. Arrogantly claiming to have found his one true love, the Crown Prince officially declares the dissolution of their sacred bond. Rosalind silently absorbs the overwhelming impropriety of the scandalous scene unfolding right before her eyes. Apologizing to Prince Leonis, she desperately tries to explain that she lacks the authority to give him an official answer herself. Remembering her father's stern warnings, she realizes the church-approved engagement deeply binds her family's unshakable honor. She flashes back to the tense morning conversation where her reluctant father stubbornly refused to yield. Holding her ground, Rosalind firmly instructs the prince to take his grievances directly to her father, the head of House Dickens. Undeterred by her deflection, Leonis demands that she actively help persuade the stubborn duke to accept the breakup. A heavy, suffocating silence falls over the grand room as the sheer weight of his unreasonable request sinks in. Leonis coldly attempts to justify his betrayal, twisting the knife by claiming the broken engagement is actually for her own sake. He ruthlessly dismisses their shared future, definitively stating that a marriage in name only would be completely meaningless. Trembling slightly in place, she swallows her bitter words despite the overwhelming unfairness of the situation. A servant abruptly interrupts the tense confrontation, urgently calling out to Lady Rosalind. The servant loudly announces that Her Majesty the Queen immediately demands Rosalind's presence in her chambers. Groaning in mounting dread, she deeply regrets not fleeing in her carriage when she had the fleeting chance. Furious at the prince's completely hollow words, she hardens her resolve and decides she can never agree to his terms. Bracing herself for the coming storm, she prepares to face the ultimate authority of the entire kingdom. The imposing Queen Leonis's formidable mother coldly interrogates Rosalind about her upcoming intentions. Startled by the open hostility, Rosalind carefully questions the meaning behind the queen's dangerously sharp inquiry. The queen viciously berates her, furiously questioning how she could possibly let herself lose her royal fiancé to a lowly baroness. A harsh scoff violently cuts through the air, highlighting the absolute disdain directed squarely at her. Disappointed and fierce, the queen demands to know why Rosalind lacks the spine to rebuke Leonis and accuse the baroness of infidelity. The queen angrily reminds her that she remains the chosen fiancée by royal will, despite Duke Dickens heavily forcing the issue in the past. Bowing her head in total defeat, Rosalind weakly offers a terrible submissive apology to the monarch. Seizing on her pathetic submissiveness, the queen cruelly notes that it is small wonder Leonis threw her away for a mere baroness. Lecturing with ironclad authority, the queen declares that a true ruler must boldly defy even the crown prince or king to resolve matters. Delivering a final crushing blow to her pride, the queen bluntly admits she opposed the political engagement right from the start. Softening her glare just a fraction, the queen acknowledges the grueling hard work Rosalind poured into her intense princess training. Stripping away the last of her dignity, the monarch cruelly declares that mere training is not nearly enough to survive. Rejecting her completely, the queen firmly finalizes that Rosalind is thoroughly and unequivocally unfit to ever become the future queen. The ruthless queen immediately snaps at Rosalind and cruelly dismisses her frantic apologies. Commanding her to leave, the absolute monarch forcefully banishes the exhausted girl from the room. A massive wooden door slams shut with violent finality to permanently seal her crushing defeat. Standing alone in the hallway, Rosalind releases a heavy sigh laden with utter despair. A grand carriage rapidly rattles away down the cobblestone streets, carrying her away from the hostile palace. She violently flinches as she vividly remembers her demanding father ordering her to aggressively defend her royal title at all costs. Dreading the impending storm, she realizes with mounting terror that her furious father will surely be waiting for her. She nervously clenches her trembling hands, knowing that simple apologies will never appease his terrifying wrath this time. Unlike past fleeting whispers, this devastating disaster represents an official royal request to completely shatter her engagement. Overwhelmed by suffocating dread, she slumps hopelessly inside the violently rocking carriage. Drifting off into a troubled sleep, she morbidly prays that she will never wake up to face the brutal reality. Plunging deep into her subconscious memories, she vividly recalls her birth as the eldest daughter of the prestigious House Dickens. She starkly remembers inheriting unusually plain dark brown hair and identically dark eyes. Bearing an ordinary resemblance to her paternal grandmother, her muted coloring always felt far too plain for high-ranking nobility. In sharp contrast, her older brother Raymond shines brightly as a golden-haired prodigy gifted in every martial and literary art. Desperately idolizing her perfect sibling, young Rosalind eagerly pledges to work endlessly for the absolute sake of their ducal house. Pushing herself beyond all normal limits, she fiercely vows to excel in both grueling studies and brutal combat. Straining her tiny body, she violently swings a heavy wooden training sword until her muscles completely give out. She brutally collapses face-first into the unforgiving dirt as her physical endurance thoroughly shatters. Hot tears of immense frustration silently streak down her bruised face as relentless failure crushes her young spirit. Around that painfully dark time, a permanent shadow violently falls over her entire childhood. Bitterly disappointed by her glaring lack of capabilities, her cold parents completely withdraw all their parental affection. Adding to her agony, her younger sister Florentia suddenly bursts into the radiant spotlight during the absolute peak of her adorable years. Blessed with their mother's stunning beauty, Florentia easily captivates everyone with a breathtakingly angelic smile. Their doting mother joyfully gifts Florentia a magnificent dress while completely ignoring her eldest daughter standing in the shadows. Pouring endless affection onto the younger girl, her parents act as if they were blessed with a daughter for the very first time. Heartbroken and completely overshadowed, Rosalind deeply accepts she can never truly embody the cherished role of the first daughter. Failing at absolutely every turn, she realizes she lacks the immense talent to even serve as a capable spare for her brother. Crushed by severe neglect, she heavily contemplates surrendering entirely and fading into a ghost-like existence. She bitterly views herself as a completely talentless child, offering absolutely zero value to her ambitious parents. Accepting this grim reality, she silently embraces her utter worthlessness as an inescapable curse. Suddenly defying the crushing despair, a fierce spark of pure, unyielding determination violently ignites within her soul. Refusing to fall entirely behind her sister, she fiercely throws her entire existence into brutally mastering her demanding studies. Clad in proper noble attire, she endlessly devours her brother's old hand-me-down books to desperately forge her own worth. Frantically guarding her fragile pride, she violently clings to this desperate academic obsession as her absolute final bastion. A massive shifting point suddenly shatters her grim routine when she finally turns 10 years old. Staring blankly ahead, immense exhaustion aggressively threatens to swallow her battered fighting spirit whole. A dark, imposing silhouette suddenly looms ominously over her weary frame. A sudden, shocking realization violently strikes her exhausted senses to snap her back to absolute attention. A commanding voice abruptly shatters the dead silence by coldly granting her official permission to join their exclusive ranks. Standing entirely alone in the quiet estate, Rosalind silently contemplates her incredibly dreary existence. Gazing down at her remarkably plain attire, she briefly considers changing into a much brighter dress. Dismissing the hopeful thought instantly, she realizes the tea party would likely end before she even finishes changing. Seeking a tiny compromise for her appearance, she decides to at least add a small touch of natural elegance. Reaching out with surprisingly gentle hands, she carefully plucks a vibrant flower from the sprawling garden. Trimming the delicate green stem, she meticulously prepares the beautiful blossom to serve as a makeshift hairpiece. Pinning the fresh flower securely into her dark hair, she silently hopes the small decoration will brighten her dull look. Taking a deep breath to violently steady her frazzled nerves, she slowly approaches the lively garden where her family gathers. Resolving to completely abandon her rigid ways, she fiercely vows to finally embrace a proper ladylike lifestyle just like her beloved sister. Imagining a genuinely peaceful future, she eagerly plans to host tea parties and dedicate herself entirely to embroidery and musical instruments. Finding a rare sliver of pure confidence, she fondly remembers being highly praised for possessing a remarkable talent for delicate embroidery. Stepping gracefully into the sunlit garden, she politely greets her mother and sister with a flawlessly practiced noble curtsy. Shattering the cheerful atmosphere instantly, the two beautiful women abruptly turn to stare at her with absolute icy disdain. Shrinking violently under their impossibly harsh glares, a massive wave of deep regret completely crashes over her fragile, hopeful spirit. Stuttering nervously beneath their highly judgmental eyes, she miserably admits that she definitely should have changed into a much brighter dress. Ignoring her anxious words entirely, her strict mother sharply demands to know exactly why she is wearing a fresh flower. Desperately trying to quickly explain herself, Rosalind softly stammers that she wore the seasonal bloom in place of a standard ribbon. Scolding her with freezing absolute authority, her mother strictly declares that wearing fresh flowers to a tea party completely ruins the tea's natural fragrance. Hurt deeply by the blatant hypocrisy, Rosalind weakly protests that Florentia previously wore a similar flower without facing any harsh punishment. Refusing to hear absolutely another word, her furious mother harshly commands the disgraced girl to immediately leave their royal presence. Fleeing the suffocating garden in absolute crushing shame, she desperately tries to completely block out their cruel, mocking laughter. Enduring her terrifying father's brutal scolding later, she silently absorbs his furious accusations regarding her complete lack of academic competence. Retreating rapidly to the cold safety of her dark room, she silently weeps over her powerful family's unbelievably cruel double standards. Staring blankly into the oppressive darkness, a massive sense of complete isolation violently crushes her entirely fragile heart. Wiping away her bitter tears aggressively, she forces herself to violently swallow the suffocating unfairness of her deeply pathetic existence. Hardening her completely shattered resolve, a cold and profoundly hollow determination entirely replaces her foolish childish hopes for parental affection. Accepting her grim reality forever, she permanently realizes that she will absolutely never receive the same pure forgiveness effortlessly granted to her sister. Abandoning all foolish dreams of a normal ladylike life, she violently throws herself back into her impossibly grueling academic studies. Knowing she can never be the beloved daughter or the prized successor, she aggressively fights to forge her absolute identity solely as the Duke's competent eldest child. Locking away her true emotions entirely, she fiercely embraces this incredibly strict utilitarian role as her absolute only worth within the highly hostile household. Looming dangerously over her with a cold, calculating gaze, her strict father bluntly demands a thorough progress report on her intense studies. Masking her deep exhaustion flawlessly, she obediently assures him that her immensely rigorous education is progressing absolutely perfectly. Burying her foolish inner child forever, she permanently destroys any lingering weak desire to be openly loved exactly like her golden siblings. Discovering a highly fragile survival strategy, she quickly realizes maintaining the absolute illusion of the ideal ducal daughter guarantees a superficial peace at the dinner table. Earning an extremely tiny measure of shallow trust, she finally receives official permission to independently attend formal tea parties at rival estates. Ignoring Florentia's incredibly spoiled whining about being left behind, Rosalind silently prepares for her highly scrutinized noble social debut. Staring coldly into her flawlessly polished mirror, she fiercely vows to absolutely never repeat her past naive mistakes in front of high society. Stepping bravely into the grand carriage, she perfectly understands she is solely attending as a strict political tool rather than a deeply cherished child. Carrying the incredibly heavy weight of her family's immense pride, she meticulously plans to extract highly valuable compliments from the rival nobility. Accepting her entirely cold destiny without any hesitation, she fully embraces her ultimate role as the flawless living demonstration of the Duke's overwhelming prestige. A noble lady graciously compliments her flawless etiquette by recognizing her as the true daughter of the Duke of Dickens. She warmly smiles in genuine gratitude as the rare words of praise wash over her. Realizing it might just be polite small talk, she deeply cherishes the sweet confirmation that outsiders actually acknowledge her relentless efforts. That tiny sliver of external validation quietly saves her bruised spirit from total despair. At precisely 12 years old, her imposing father summons Rosalind to his study to dramatically alter her entire destiny. Staring her down with absolute authority, he boldly declares a massive shift in her upcoming future. He officially commands that from this day forward, she is the formal fiancée of His Highness Crown Prince Leonis. Rosalind stares up at her father in absolute stunned silence as the immense weight of the royal engagement crashes down. Overwhelming tears of sudden pure joy quickly pool in her wide eyes as she processes the incredible news. Her father brutally crushes her fragile happiness by coldly reminding her she was chosen solely for her family name and demands absolute gratitude. Commanding her fiercely, he severely warns her to never disgrace their prestigious family name and to flawlessly serve her new royal role. Swallowing her bitter disappointment, she respectfully bows and obediently accepts her massive new burden. A familiar dark ache violently pierces her chest as she painfully realizes her cold father still refuses to truly acknowledge her. Gazing down at the floor, she forces herself to violently bury her childish craving for true parental affection. A sudden powerful spark of intense ambition violently ignites deep within her entirely shattered heart. Clenching her tiny fists, she fiercely realizes that she will inevitably rise to become the crown princess and eventually the absolute queen. Shedding her pathetic label as a mere spare heir, she eagerly anticipates the glorious day she completely outranks the reigning duke himself. A cold satisfaction washes over her as she calculates that her beloved golden sister will forever remain hopelessly beneath her royal station. Discarding her agonizing old titles completely, she permanently vows to shed her painful identity as the unloved spare entirely. Believing her endless agonizing efforts have finally been heavily rewarded, her current reality violently shatters that long-held delusion. The devastating absolute reality that her entire royal engagement has been brutally dissolved violently drags her back to the horrifying present. Stumbling weakly through the dark empty halls, a suffocating wave of pure terror violently grips her exhausted body. Trembling in complete despair, she frantically wonders what she is possibly supposed to do with her shattered existence now. Having desperately clung to her royal fiancé status, she realizes she is now nothing more than the pathetic ducal daughter who pathetically lost to a mere baroness. Feeling utterly repulsive, she brutally degrades herself as a worthless caterpillar that tragically failed to ever become a beautiful butterfly. A stern servant suddenly intercepts her dark path to coldly announce that the furious duke is currently waiting for her. An overwhelming primal fear of her terrifying father violently overshadows any lingering dread regarding the cruel prince or the harsh queen. Despite knowing she was never truly expected to wildly succeed, she desperately prays to avoid being entirely cast aside by her own family. Pushing open the heavy wooden doors, she meekly pardons her sudden intrusion into his incredibly intimidating study. Her furious father sits silently at his massive desk while radiating an absolutely terrifying aura of barely contained pure rage. He coldly confirms the absolute disaster by stating that His Highness officially requested to completely dissolve his royal engagement with her today. Bowing her head in absolute miserable shame, she offers a deeply pathetic apology for her monumental utter failure. Smashing his heavy fist violently onto the desk, he furiously roars at the absolute sheer audacity of the royal family mocking their prestigious house. His overwhelming pure fury aggressively fills the silent room as he violently refuses to accept such a massive public humiliation. Rosalind violently flinches backward in sheer terror as his incredibly explosive anger physically rattles her entirely fragile nerves. Stuttering miserably through her immense fear, she frantically apologizes again for bringing such massive public dishonor to their grand house. Desperately clinging to a tiny shred of foolish hope, she frantically promises to somehow speak with the crown prince again. Ignoring her pathetic pleas completely, her cold father aggressively scribbles a harsh letter while entirely dismissing her highly desperate presence. Begging for pure mercy, she desperately asks for one absolute final chance to violently prove her worth as a true member of this grand house. Without looking up, he coldly reveals that he already forcefully told His Highness he absolutely refuses to accept the dissolution of their royal engagement. Shattering her fragile world, the Duke coldly declares this the perfect opportunity to swap her with Florentia. Stunned into absolute silence, Rosalind stares blankly as the brutal reality of his words crashes over her. Dismissing her shock entirely, her father coldly explains how Florentia's young age complicated the initial engagement talks. He bluntly states the age difference made it completely impossible for Florentia to officially secure the fiancé title back then. Realizing she avoided a scolding, Rosalind listens in horror as he reveals they merely used her to hold the royal seat. Frustrated by the unexpected timeline, the Duke complains about his foolish hope for her to endure the prince's childish nonsense another year. Completely overwhelmed by the massive betrayal, Rosalind struggles to understand the cruel depths of her family's deception. Confident in his golden child, the Duke arrogantly asserts that 15-year-old Florentia will easily crush the shabby baroness. A suffocating silence rapidly fills the grand room as her entire existence seemingly vanishes into thin air. Snapping her back to reality, her terrifying father harshly demands a swift explanation for her idle gaping. Imposing strict house arrest, he ruthlessly forbids any visitors or letters until he single-handedly handles the new arrangements. Desperately stepping forward, the heartbroken girl weakly begs her imposing father for a tiny shred of mercy. Banishment falls instantly as the furious Duke harshly commands her to leave his sight immediately. Trembling violently in place, she completely absorbs the absolute finality of her brutal family rejection. Forced out of the imposing room, she moves exactly like a hollow puppet entirely stripped of its soul. A heavy wooden door slams shut with violent force to permanently sever her from her father's grace. Standing utterly alone in the dark hallway, the suffocating weight of the agonizing truth threatens to crush her. Her exhausted legs completely give out as she miserably slumps against the cold, unforgiving wooden door. A horrifying realization violently strikes her mind as she pieces together the agonizing truth of her shattered past. Dark memories aggressively flood her fragile consciousness to maliciously mock her endless years of pointless struggle. Clutching her chest in deep agony, she lets the invisible wounds of her shattered pride bleed relentlessly. She bitterly remembers foolishly believing that she genuinely secured her undisputed place as the grand royal fiancé. A crushing despair swallows her whole as she realizes she never actually graduated from acting as a mere defective spare. Stripped of all her grand illusions, she finally understands her permanent role as a convenient temporary stand-in. Accepting her grim destiny, she heavily acknowledges that her true moment to shine will absolutely never arrive. Confessing to the empty hall, she completely admits she never truly loved Leonis despite appreciating his royal status. She agonizingly recalls her desperate hope that securing the crown might finally force her cold parents to acknowledge her. Clinging to pathetic dreams, she desperately envisioned herself acting as a beautiful bride, smiling bravely just for show. A deep pang of intense guilt violently twists her stomach as she reflects on her completely selfish motives. Knowing she used the prince to aggressively elevate her own family's standing, she frantically tried her best. She desperately repeats her silent plea that she genuinely gave her maximum effort to fulfill those fake royal duties. Terrified of a violent discard, she constantly compromised her own pride to eagerly accommodate His Highness's every selfish wish. A sickening dread completely washes over her as she suspects the cruel queen and her parents knew the truth all along. She painfully realizes she only performed endlessly to ensure her harsh family would overlook her complete lack of results. Stripped to her absolute core, the miserable girl admits she acted entirely desperate to protect her own fragile existence. The devastating mantra endlessly echoes through her shattered mind as her pathetic self-preservation fails completely. A sudden bout of dark hysterical laughter violently bubbles up from the very depths of her completely broken soul. Mocking her own endless suffering, she bitterly reflects on how utterly ridiculous her lifelong struggle appears right now. Embracing the absolute tragedy of her life, she accepts her pathetic status as a colossal disposable fool. A final dark vision violently consumes her mind as she pictures her beautiful sister easily stealing the prince. Reflecting bitterly on the tragic romance between the prince and his beloved Baroness, Rosalind feels completely alienated. She vividly imagines Lady Amy swallowing her tears to step aside for His Highness while secretly harboring a locked-away love. Realizing her own pathetic role in this grand royal tragedy, she entirely accepts her absolute status as a discarded fool. Wandering aimlessly through the cold shadows, she frantically wonders what she is supposed to do now that she has left the estate. A sudden sharp memory from a distant past life violently pierces her fractured consciousness. A massive wave of deeply repressed memories violently drags her back to a completely different modern world. Staring down at a cherished stuffed bear, her modern mother coldly demands she surrender it because she is the older sister. Heartbroken and incredibly confused, the young girl completely fails to understand why she must always sacrifice her own pure happiness. Forced to constantly yield to her spoiled sibling, she bitterly watches the younger girl eagerly snatch up the best cake slices. Clinging desperately to her favorite toy, she fiercely refuses to hand it over until her mother brutally invokes the older sister rule. This toxic title quickly transforms into a literal curse of destruction that systematically strips absolutely everything away from her. The sinister phrase forcing her to always act like a mature older sister maliciously functions as an inescapable magic spell. Her manipulative mother constantly praises her absolute dependability while bitterly complaining about the younger sibling's endless frustrating laziness. Venting endless frustrations, the toxic mother aggressively wonders why the younger sibling routinely skips cram school instead of acting responsibly. Deepening the emotional manipulation, the mother wildly complains about her husband working endlessly to falsely claim she can only rely on her dependable eldest daughter. Desperately craving genuine parental affection, the foolish older sister tragically convinces herself that her incredibly demanding mother is secretly kind. Trapping her completely, the manipulative parent violently forces her to attend a local public university instead of bravely chasing her own bright dreams. Piling on the sheer financial agony, the mother ruthlessly forces her to take out massive student loans just to secretly fund her sister's vocational school tuition. Trapped permanently inside her dreary childhood home, her own personal bright dreams slowly wither away into absolute dark nothingness. Forbidding any bold move to Tokyo, the incredibly selfish mother harshly demands she quickly secure a stable local civil servant job to stay close forever. Swallowing her intense silent misery, she obediently sacrifices her absolute freedom just to endlessly support her constantly complaining mother. Demanding even more painful financial sacrifice, the greedy mother aggressively pressures her to contribute significantly larger portions of her hard-earned salary to the household. Using the spoiled sibling as a brutal weapon, the mother heavily guilt-trips her by claiming the tight household budget desperately needs extra funds for yet another new vocational school. Shattering the fragile illusion of family loyalty, the thoroughly spoiled younger sister suddenly abandons the house entirely on her own. A devastating truth violently emerges, revealing the highly selfish sibling actually stole the family funds to wildly run away to Tokyo. Ignoring the massive betrayal entirely, the mother coldly pivots to aggressively demanding her oldest daughter's freshly earned civil servant bonus. Bound permanently to the suffocating household, she silently listens to her mother aggressively scheme to mercilessly drain her newly acquired wealth. Surrendering entirely to the crushing financial abuse, she completely agrees to hand over her hard-earned bonus to actively support her deeply ungrateful mother. A brutal new revelation violently strikes when the mother casually announces the runaway sister is returning home heavily pregnant with a wealthy new husband. Discovering a massive hidden betrayal, she realizes her mother secretly maintained constant contact with the highly manipulative runaway sister this entire time. Executing a horrifying master plan, the mother aggressively demands her older daughter's life savings to forcefully build an extension so the returning golden child can comfortably take over the house. Staring in absolute stunned silence, the deeply exhausted older sister completely fails to quickly process the sheer magnitude of this staggering familial betrayal. Calling her an absolute hopeless disappointment, the incredibly cruel mother ruthlessly berates her for utterly failing to secure her own romantic marriage. Demanding proper filial piety, the toxic parent cruelly orders her to permanently abandon any foolish thoughts of leaving home and to immediately focus on providing grandchildren. Mocking her completely empty 30-year-old existence, the highly ungrateful mother brutally commands her to quickly just buy whatever pleases the returning golden child. Violently shutting down any desperate attempt to escape, the mother absolutely forbids her from leaving the house during her golden sister's impending childbirth. The lifelong curse violently echoes in her entirely shattered mind as she realizes she endured endless suffering simply because she was the older sister. A suffocating massive wave of intense bitter regret aggressively washes over her completely broken and exhausted spirit. Staring blankly into the absolute dark void, she forcefully acknowledges her own massive stupidity for willingly enabling decades of horrific financial and emotional abuse. Shattering her final deeply held delusion, she tragically realizes that desperately believing her mother was actually kind was easily the biggest mistake of her entire pathetic life. Lamenting her completely drained savings, she bitterly realizes she has absolutely no marriage prospects or future grandchildren. Reaching her absolute breaking point, she desperately decides she can no longer endure this suffocating existence as she approaches 30. Clenching her fists in the heavy silence, a massive wave of pure long-repressed fury violently crashes over her. Raising her tear-stained face, an incredibly fierce spark of absolute rebellion finally ignites deep within her completely exhausted soul. Shattering her lifelong curse entirely, she fiercely declares she is completely and permanently done acting as the compliant older sister. Refusing to surrender another ounce of money or trust, she aggressively resolves to permanently abandon her highly toxic household. Snatching up her personal belongings swiftly, she rapidly initiates her desperate but perfectly calculated final escape plan. Packing her bags in absolute secrecy, she definitively prepares to permanently sever every single tie to her abusive family. Stepping out into the liberating dawn, she completely leaves her deeply suffocating childhood home without a single look backward. Walking firmly down the completely empty street, she softly whispers a permanent final goodbye to her highly tragic past. Severing her emotional chains forever, she ruthlessly abandons the highly manipulative people who are merely connected to her by blood. Storming aggressively into the Human Resources Department, her furious mother violently demands to know when her runaway daughter is returning. Trying desperately to maintain absolute order, a highly frustrated clerk aggressively begs the screaming woman to calm down in the busy public office. Firmly shutting down the frantic mother, the stern official clearly states her daughter has already officially resigned from her government position. Screaming absolute vicious lies, the completely unhinged mother wildly accuses the stunned office staff of secretly kidnapping her beloved child. Whispering quietly amongst themselves, the office workers excitedly gossip about how the clever girl perfectly staged a fake city business trip to entirely empty her room and vanish. Shocked completely by the sheer stealth, a highly impressed co-worker openly marvels at how her family entirely failed to notice her permanently moving her belongings out. Panicking violently over her permanently lost piggy bank, the highly greedy mother screams that they absolutely cannot survive without her daughter's steady income. Demanding her daughter's massive severance pay immediately, the furious mother is bluntly denied by staff since she lacks the legally required adult consent. Connecting the dark dots instantly, the gossiping staff completely understand why the heavily exploited older sister finally fled after paying for a house addition and cars. Silently cheering her highly successful escape, the deeply empathetic co-workers mentally urge the runaway older sister to aggressively flee from that highly toxic family. Falsely claiming immense maternal devotion, the completely delusional mother aggressively insists her pride and joy would never just silently leave without saying anything. Begging the highly indifferent officials desperately, she wildly claims someone absolutely must have wickedly tricked and completely kidnapped her adult daughter. Calmly shutting down her completely wild theories, a highly stoic officer sharply points out the 30-year-old left entirely on good terms with zero absolute signs of foul play. Exposing her completely selfish motives entirely, the frantic mother aggressively whines about desperately needing her oldest daughter strictly as free labor for the younger sister's upcoming childbirth. Brushing off her highly frantic demands smoothly, the deeply unimpressed officer promises to officially file a missing person report while sternly reminding her the runaway is a fully independent adult. Dismissing the highly chaotic woman entirely, the sensible officer bluntly advises her to just go home and completely focus on the impending childbirth instead of worrying. Trudging heavily back to her completely empty home, the deeply defeated mother violently struggles under the massive crushing weight of her suddenly shattered reality. Deluding herself entirely into complete madness, she fondly remembers how easily she could entirely manipulate her supposedly stubborn daughter strictly using the magical older sister guilt trip. Panicking massively over the horrific logistical nightmare, she suddenly realizes the older daughter cleverly traded in the old car without ever actually ordering the promised new one. Staring blankly at the completely crushing consequences of her absolute greed, she pathetically calls out for the deeply exploited older sister she mercilessly drove away. Opening her heavily burdened eyes slowly, a completely disoriented Rosalind dramatically awakens in her massive dark aristocratic bedroom. Gasping sharply in pure shock, the completely overwhelming massive flood of two entirely different lifetimes aggressively collides deep within her racing mind. Clutching her heavily pounding head aggressively, she desperately tries to rapidly stabilize her wildly spinning and deeply fractured senses. Blinking away the intense agonizing disorientation, a completely cold and terrifyingly sharp clarity finally fully settles over her entire trembling being. Whispering softly into the completely dark void, she finally fully grasps the absolutely shocking permanent reality of her highly tragic dual existence. Reclaiming her completely shattered noble identity, she definitively acknowledges herself completely as the fiercely proud eldest daughter of a highly prestigious ducal house. Drawing an incredibly fierce and painful comparison, she aggressively realizes her current pathetic existence violently mirrors the completely horrific nightmares of her discarded past life. Rising aggressively from her royal bed with absolute total resolve, she fiercely completely refuses to let her highly tragic history constantly repeat itself. Fully embracing her completely ultimate absolute truth, she completely prepares to violently permanently shatter her completely toxic designated role as a deeply compliant duke's daughter forever. Zarind intensely admires her slender body and lustrous hair, acknowledging she is almost as beautiful as Lorenzia. Zarind's abundant beauty undeniably commands attention in the quiet moment. The silent atmosphere thickens as unspoken tension fills the expansive space. A profound stillness settles over the scene, highlighting the gravity of her impending realization. Struggling to recall a name or face from a dream world, she suddenly realizes she has reincarnated into another life. Memories flood back of her painful time acting as the overly responsible older sister. She remembers desperately craving even a sliver of praise from her demanding mother. The harsh reality crushes her spirit as she realizes she was merely a pawn valued strictly for her money and labor. A deep sense of sorrow washes over her as she recognizes the tragic parallels to her current self. Heavy emotions hang in the air as she reflects silently on her unfortunate and restrictive fate. Frustration boils over as she questions the supposed perks and easy life expected after reincarnating. Finding it completely ridiculous, she laments lacking a super butler or handsome childhood friend while remaining stuck as an unloved older sister. Relief washes over her as she gladly recalls working independently in her past life straight into her 30s. A lingering sense of fiery determination solidifies in her mind despite the harsh circumstances. Drawing explosive power from her newly awakened past, she feels those old memories actively making her stronger. She steels her absolute resolve in the quiet room, preparing her body for the dangerous trials ahead. She quickly chugs down water, the refreshing blue liquid providing a brief moment of absolute clarity. The cold drink revitalizes her heightened senses as she gathers her scattered and chaotic thoughts. Suspicion clouds her sharp mind as she wonders if her regained Japanese sensibilities make this world suddenly feel incredibly fishy. She carefully surveys her immediate surroundings, letting her sharpened survival instincts guide her next move. Tossing her restrictive shoes aside with immense relief, she wholly embraces her true Japanese soul. A deep sigh of absolute comfort escapes her lips as the physical exhaustion temporarily melts away. Her piercing gaze sharpens as she immediately begins strategizing her next crucial and dangerous steps. Confined to her room by her strict father, she realizes her freshly broken engagement provides the perfect cover from unwanted suspicion. A fiery spark of unyielding rebellion ignites within the suffocating walls of her solitary confinement. Burning with fierce defiance, she vows to escape and show everyone what she is truly capable of achieving. She calculates her grim reality, realizing she is far worse off now than when she was a working adult with actual financial savings. Anxiety flares as she contemplates the terrible public safety and grueling work environment of this harsh new era. She braces herself against the undeniable truth that this brutal world operates far more harshly than Japan ever did. Resolving that she absolutely cannot stay in this oppressive house, her mind races with daring and risky possibilities. Chuckling darkly at the math, she calculates that combining her 17 years here with her past late 20s life gives her the sharp sense of someone pushing 50. Accepting this dud reincarnation devoid of doting families, she decides to aggressively survive using her past life experience and current physical specs. She touches her plain hair and eyes, knowing they completely disappoint the demanding high nobility. A cunning smile touches her determined face as she realizes being utterly unremarkable is the perfect strategic advantage for a runaway. Shedding her former identity forever, she officially and forcefully renounces her prestigious title as the Duke's eldest daughter. Without a single shred of hesitation, she bids a final and cold goodbye to the toxic family she once knew. She brutally severs all ties with the people she merely lived with and shared only superficial connections. Stepping boldly away from her restrictive past, she embraces the vast and dangerous unknown waiting beyond the estate. The heavy doors of her former miserable life close silently behind her as she vanishes entirely into the shadows. A thrilling new chapter begins in absolute secrecy, her spirit ablaze with the unyielding promise of ultimate freedom. A tense silence heavily blankets the opening scene as unseen dangers fiercely lurk in the dense shadows. The ominous atmosphere actively thickens while unknown figures stealthily position themselves for a sudden strike. A brutal ambush abruptly shatters the quiet peace as hidden enemies suddenly launch their coordinated attack. Chaos instantly erupts across the battlefield while desperate defenders fiercely clash with the overwhelming attackers. A loyal guard urgently screams for someone to escape while valiantly holding the aggressive enemies off. A desperate voice frantically cries out Nak's name as the violent skirmish rapidly intensifies. Swords clash violently in the chaotic fray as warriors fiercely battle for their very survival. Blood frantically spills across the dark terrain while the relentless assault ruthlessly breaks defensive lines. The ferocious struggle reaches a critical boiling point as fighters exchange devastatingly heavy blows. A decisive strike brutally cuts through the air and severely changes the dark tide of the vicious conflict. Shadowy figures mercilessly press their heavy advantage while the overwhelmed targets desperately scramble away. A pained grunt heavily escapes someone's bloodied lips as a harsh impact violently strikes them down. The brutal aftermath of the skirmish quietly leaves deeply battered bodies scattered across the ruined landscape. A swift retreat hastily begins as the surviving victims desperately flee the terrifying bloody massacre. Exhausted lungs burn fiercely while frantic footsteps rapidly pound against the unforgiving rural terrain. The harrowing escape aggressively pushes physical limits as the relentless pursuers finally fall slightly behind. A desperate survivor urgently realizes they must find clean water fast to successfully stay alive. Thick mud heavily coats the surrounding ground as a grueling trek through the dense wilderness begins. Nature's harsh elements mercilessly batter the weary traveler trudging through the dark and dangerous environment. A glimmer of faint hope subtly appears as the treacherous journey finally nears an unexpected peaceful end. The rugged scenery abruptly shifts into a completely different and surprisingly calm domestic setting. A peaceful bedroom slowly comes into clear focus as the chaotic nightmare finally fades entirely away. An attentive servant politely interrupts the quiet morning by gently offering to help dress her soon. She groggily asks the time and calmly learns it is just before noon from her waiting attendant. She politely requests a warm bath and graciously thanks her helpful servant for the immediate assistance. Water splashes loudly as she heavily admits she completely overslept after everything that recently happened. Warm water deeply soothes her tired muscles as she quietly washes away the heavy lingering stress. She carefully cleanses herself while silently processing the massive shifts occurring in her complicated new life. A quiet sigh of pure relief escapes her relaxed lips as she completely finishes her refreshing wash. She deeply cherishes finally having some time completely alone to properly gather her highly scattered thoughts. She thoughtfully realizes she did not dream of what came after her past life while resting in bed last night. She vividly remembers only seeing joyful fragments of what she truly enjoyed and deeply loved previously. Fond memories of engaging web novels and fun department store events warmly flood her nostalgic mind. Strong feelings of pure joy and absolute happiness comfortably linger within her thoroughly relaxed chest. She objectively acknowledges the harsh situation of losing her engagement and facing imminent confinement without any allies. She confidently determines that her past life's knowledge and memories will effectively serve as her ultimate cheat to escape. She fiercely empowers herself by boldly realizing she now truly has herself to strictly rely upon. She creatively ponders inventing something like a water wheel with her memories even if making a massive fortune proves difficult. She firmly resolves to work somewhere incredibly far away and successfully start a completely brand new life. She happily plans to find affordable restaurants and read romance novels while accepting that movies and modern games are impossible. A sudden realization powerfully strikes her racing mind as she actively contemplates the undeniable mechanics of the game. She eagerly shifts her intense focus directly toward her mysterious and potentially magical items. A quiet epiphany suddenly dawns on her as scattered fragmented memories begin aligning perfectly. She gazes intently at the ornate accessory resting silently in her trembling physical hands. Sharp recognition immediately flashes across her widened eyes as she correctly identifies the very familiar object. She marvels at the adventurer's bracelet from Fantasy Quest that conveniently provides crucial access to the item box and data save functions. Deep nostalgia warmly washes over her as she fondly remembers Fantasy Quest completely dominating the national gaming scene since her distant childhood. She proudly recalls playing the adult online version and vigorously raising her dual-wielding warrior Mars who heavily mirrored an iconic demonic actor. She wistfully reflects that a childhood playthrough would have certainly resulted in creating a cute mage or cleric instead. Crushing daily stress aggressively drove her to construct a straightforward character brutally specialized in devastating physical attacks and blinding speed. A bittersweet childhood memory quickly surfaces of finally receiving the desperately coveted game for her highly anticipated 4th-grade birthday. The young girl beams with absolute joy while gratefully thanking her mother for the notably expensive present. Chaos abruptly erupts as little Mitsu aggressively demands the cute pink cartridge entirely for herself. Small hands viciously grapple for absolute control over the highly prized Fantasy Quest game box. The frantic mother desperately attempts to intervene while the older sister furiously demands Mitsu immediately let go of her rightful birthday present. Loud wailing completely shatters the peace as Mitsu maliciously throws a massive tantrum over the heavily contested game. A sudden violent slip ruthlessly yanks the fragile cartridge entirely out of their desperate physical grasp. The thoroughly frustrated mother quickly scolds the older sister while completely overlooking Mitsu's blatant and terrible misbehavior. Hot tears of burning frustration spill endlessly as the older sister vehemently curses the crushing unfairness of losing her precious new game. The tragically broken game completely shatters on the hard floor and brutally ruins her anticipated youthful joy. She heavily laments breaking her solemn promise to play with friends and fully cements the absolute worst birthday memory ever experienced. 10 long years later, she secretly reignited her suppressed passion and eagerly started playing the online version entirely alone. She intensely questions the prolonged presence of this unused nostalgic bracelet that prominently bears her engraved player name within the dusty jewelry box. Her sharp eyes carefully trace the meticulously carved letters clearly spelling out Rosalind. Pure absolute shock electrifies her entire body upon instantly discovering her own name undeniably etched in foreign English characters. She fiercely grips the heavy implications as a terrifyingly massive truth actively threatens to fundamentally upend her known reality. Cold panic subtly edges into her racing thoughts as she wildly questions if this impossible scenario could actually be entirely real. A staggering realization forcefully hits her as she seriously contemplates being hopelessly trapped directly inside the literal game world. Deep confusion thoroughly clouds her sharp mind since 17 years of intensive royal education completely omitted any mention of magic or terrifying monsters. Thrilling excitement suddenly overrides her lingering doubts as she enthusiastically wonders if she's secretly received an overpowered reincarnation cheat. She boldly braces her stance and vigorously channels her absolute focus to directly test the highly magical theory. A powerful commanding word dramatically escapes her parted lips as she decisively shouts for the sudden magical release. Brilliant magical light violently explodes outward and completely illuminates the previously dark and quiet bedroom. A glowing holographic item box screen dramatically materializes right before her extremely widened and amazed eyes. Triumphant victory powerfully surges through her pumping veins as she successfully accesses the magical item box containing Mars's legendary belongings. She fiercely envisions wielding immense combat power and bravely fighting precisely like her heavily admired dual-wielding warrior Mars. She confidently challenges any foolish enemies to step forward and viciously face her absolute incoming wrath. She boldly relies on her extensive childhood sword training to confidently prepare her body for the impending brutal combat. Her frail physical arms tremble uncontrollably as the massive weapon predictably proves completely overwhelmingly heavy to effectively lift. Utter crushing disappointment rapidly replaces her fierce bravado as she tragically realizes she totally lacks the sheer physical strength to properly use her overpowered items. She abruptly realizes that equipping mighty weapons and armor demands strict level requirements for specific attributes and skills. Relief washes over her as she admits that actually fighting enemies with a physical sword sounds utterly terrifying. Eager to uncover more secrets, she sharply shifts her focus to explore the rest of her mysterious magical inventory. A triumphant grin forms when she discovers shining gold coins that instantly solve all her future financial problems. Anticipation crackles in the air as she excitedly prepares to test the magical system's boundless hidden potential. She delicately pinches a gleaming gold coin between her fingers to actively experiment with its physical reality. With a commanding voice, she firmly chants the storage spell to bend reality to her absolute will. Thrilled by her rapid success, she quickly discovers she can easily store physical objects from this new world too. She eagerly equips the Ring of Dexterity and feels a sudden massive surge in her physical coordination and agility. She marvels at the adventurer's bracelet for infinitely storing massive furniture while drastically boosting her stamina and strength. Her heart utterly races as she stumbles upon the unbelievable options to cast powerful fire and water balls. Pure euphoria violently explodes within her as she confirms the legendary existence of genuine magic. Empowered by fate, she fiercely realizes she completely inherited all the devastating magic wielded by her avatar Mars. She happily reviews her arsenal of sleep spells and barrier magic alongside purification abilities that generate clean drinking water. She cautiously realizes she inherited all of Mars's powerful skills and vows to meticulously verify each dangerous ability. Cold dread briefly grips her as she acknowledges the sheer danger of exposing magic in a magicless society. Trembling at the terrifying thought of becoming a living human weapon, she firmly vows to use her magic secretly. Justifying her bold actions, she decides to covertly steal local supplies as fair compensation for her stolen wages. A cunning smirk graces her lips as she aggressively plots to completely empty the room right before her escape. Bitter memories resurface of enduring 5 agonizing years of grueling bridal training and endless scorn from rival princesses. Joyfully praising the heavens, she gratefully reclassifies her new life as an absolute jackpot reincarnation. Fueled by blazing determination, she officially kicks off her daring mission to ruthlessly gather crucial escape supplies. Testing her destructive boundaries, she boldly raises her hand and confidently casts a fiery projectile spell. A massive fiery explosion violently rocks the area, forcing a sheepish apology from her reckless lips. She cleverly deduces that Mars's unique skill setup perfectly mirrors a deadly assassin by utilizing absolute sound isolation. Embracing her dark new persona, she vividly imagines stealthily confronting the arrogant prince with a chilling midnight greeting. She wickedly envisions her stunned target panicking over her impossible infiltration and joyfully accepts the deadly assassin role. Shrouded in thick darkness, she silently hones in on a faintly glowing treasure waiting to be ruthlessly taken. Channeling unseen magical forces, she effortlessly levitates a massive heavy chest straight into the air. A victorious cheer heavily escapes her lungs as she successfully secures the highly valuable stolen loot. A terrified guard violently stammers in absolute shock after discovering the completely impossible daytime heist. Panic heavily grips the desperate sentry as he stares blankly into the inexplicably hollow and ransacked storage room. The immense royal vault now stands completely barren after being ruthlessly stripped of all its priceless treasures. Unfazed by the massive ongoing chaos, she greedily continues chanting her storage spell to absorb even more riches. Satisfied with her massive haul, she coolly decides her incredibly stuffed inventory should securely suffice for now. Operating in complete absolute secrecy, she steadily accelerates her brilliant escape preparations night after endless night. She politely approaches the rugged stable hand and confidently requests permission to immediately go horseback riding. Rejecting frail traditions, she sharply interrupts the friendly worker to demand a standard heavy saddle instead of a lady's version. Her fiery ambition flares entirely as she boldly demands the absolute largest and strongest horse available in the stables. Frustration lightly bubbles as the apologetic stable hand firmly explains those powerful beasts are currently away on nightly duties. Looking at a magnificent large horse, she excitedly questions its immediate availability. She carefully asks if the beautiful creature is secretly injured or harbors any problematic flaws. The confident stable hand proudly assures her the horse boasts incredibly strong legs, boundless stamina, and a wonderfully gentle nature. She sharply questions why such a fine beast remains completely unused for nightly duties, only to learn its unique spotted coat is foolishly considered a bad omen. Disgusted by the absolute absurdity of judging a horse by its coat pattern, she eagerly confirms its elite status directly with the worker. The experienced stable hand praises the horse's exceptionally thick cannon bones, noting she would easily excel as a top-tier regional courier horse. Feeling incredibly reassured by the glowing recommendation, she warmly asks the massive creature's proper name. The respectful stable hand formally introduces the sturdy and loyal horse as Tabby. Smiling warmly at her magnificent new steed, she greets Tabby and happily promises they will get along perfectly. With her reliable transportation finally secured, she decisively prepares to mount the large animal for a crucial test ride. Swinging gracefully up into the saddle, she immediately secures a powerful grip on the heavy leather reins. She distinctly remembers only ever practicing with a highly restrictive lady's saddle during her intensely sheltered childhood. A magical riding skill suddenly activates, surging powerful equestrian knowledge and perfect balance directly into her focused mind. Empowered by the mysterious magical system, she effortlessly controls the massive horse with flawless professional form. While enjoying the smooth ride, she actively ponders which distant town would serve as the absolute best location to restart her life. She strategically considers coastal towns for delicious fish while desperately hoping to avoid overly hot climates completely lacking modern air conditioning. Repurposing her old and tedious princess education books, she finds genuine joy in intensely studying them to support her brand new survival goals. A profound sense of absolute peace washes over her as she joyfully realizes this fleeting moment is the happiest she has ever truly been. The The suffocating need to constantly please others completely fades away as her firm decision to escape finally sets her soul free. Finding a deep spiritual connection, she silently wonders if a certain someone also spent his quiet days experiencing this exact same beautiful liberation. A formal servant abruptly interrupts her peaceful inner thoughts to loudly announce that the strict master is demanding her immediate presence. She grimly calculates that exactly 1 full week has agonizingly passed since her prestigious royal engagement was ruthlessly broken. Steeling her tense nerves, she logically assumes the extensive formal preparations for her sister Florentia to permanently replace her are finally complete. She quietly enters the heavy wooden doors and politely excuses her sudden intrusion into the master's private and imposing office. Her cold and calculating father immediately commands her to sign a massive stack of official documents resting heavily on his desk. Absolute shock violently grips her as she forcefully reads the glaring title explicitly declaring an engagement annulment agreement. Total disbelief completely shatters her calm composure as she desperately questions the terrifying and ruinous contents of the official paperwork. Her father coldly explains they must forge a brutal annulment to completely prevent the future king from bearing the disgraceful public blemish of infidelity. Ignoring her frantic protests about their previous verbal dissolution agreement, he ruthlessly orders her to sign the forged documents immediately. He maliciously fabricates a damning story falsely claiming she flew into a violent jealous rage and physically struck the innocent baron's daughter. The extremely heavy burden of absolute fault is viciously forced entirely onto her shoulders to completely sanitize the official royal record. Her corrupt house conveniently provides a generous dowry and a shiny replacement fiancé while the royal family shamelessly enriches its own greedy coffers. The elaborate and sickening cover-up perfectly ensures the baron's daughter quietly convalesces at the palace to fully protect the prince's fragile reputation. Furious at the blatant and cruel injustice, she aggressively demands to know what possible benefit this terrible arrangement offers her. She fiercely defends her endless years of exhausting hard work and outright refuses to silently bear the punishing fault for a violent crime she never committed. Her father heartlessly dismisses her relentless noble efforts, brutally stating she simply lacked the necessary raw power to maintain her high royal position. A devastating and suffocating silence heavily crushes the room as his incredibly cruel words completely shatter her remaining familial loyalty. He arrogantly proclaims that sacrificing herself for the ducal house's financial interests is her absolute natural duty for consuming their expensive resources. Utterly heartbroken and profoundly betrayed, she desperately asks what her literal existence truly means to him as a human being. He callously reveals his ultimate heartless plan to secretly marry her off to some lowly rural vassal after Florentia officially weds the prince. She is mercilessly banished to slowly rot away in the quiet territory, coldly deemed suitable only for a miserable fate far beneath a proper duke's daughter. A heavy and oppressive tension immediately descends upon the utterly silent room. Glaring with absolute authority, the imposing master stares down at his fiercely defiant daughter. Violently rejecting the unjust documents, Rosalind questions her cruel father's actions while he demands total obedience. The suffocating silence thickens as the father rigidly awaits his daughter's complete and final submission. Screaming her absolute refusal, the defiant young woman vehemently rejects the forced annulment terms. Snapping completely under her rebellious defiance, the furious patriarch prepares a truly devastating punishment. Shocking the nearby staff, the ruthless master violently orders his own daughter thrown directly into the dungeon. Maliciously denying her any aristocratic comfort, he cruelly condemns the noblewoman to a filthy common cell. Forbidding all food, he sadistically declares that sheer starvation will finally force her to learn her proper place. Bowing deeply in sheer terror, the incredibly obedient servants instantly accept the horrific command. Gazing with profound pity, a loyal servant whispers a heartbreaking apology to the condemned young lady. Armed guards aggressively escort the disgraced Rosalind down into the pitch-black subterranean prison. Heavy iron bars violently slam shut to trap the former noblewoman in complete and terrifying darkness. Collapsing onto the freezing stone floor, she hits the harsh ground with a heavy and painful thud. Desperately fighting back tears, she sobs uncontrollably in the highly oppressive and lonely gloom. Activating stealth magic to mute her sobs, she silently mourns the agonizing pain of her father's brutal betrayal. Powerful magical barriers instantly envelop the dark cell to perfectly conceal her desperate emotional breakdown. Weeping bitterly, she confesses her lifelong desperation for just a single scrap of paternal praise. Crushed by his heartless methodology, she admits she would have willingly stepped aside if he had only asked respectfully. Clutching her aching chest, she tearfully realizes she would have easily forgiven everything for just a tiny fraction of his love. Slowly lifting her lowered head, a profound and chilling shift suddenly alters her completely shattered demeanor. Rising smoothly from the dirty floor, a strange calm suddenly replaces her previous agonizing sorrow. Staring blankly into the dark void, her tear-stained face hardens into an expression of absolute terrifying resolve. A hollow chuckle suddenly escapes her trembling lips as the sheer absurdity of her tragic situation finally sets in. Shattering the quiet silence, she throws her head back and unleashes a manic burst of unrestrained laughter. Her mad laughter echoes wildly off the stone walls as she completely sheds her former blindly obedient self. Wiping away her remaining tears, she violently strips off her cumbersome and highly restrictive noble dress. Tearing the heavy fabric away, she fiercely frees herself from the stifling physical expectations of the ducal house. Dressed only in her light undergarments, she boldly prepares to finally execute her daring grand escape. Channeling her massive hidden magical energy, she concentrates a powerful shimmering aura entirely around her fragile body. Focusing fiercely on the locked iron door, she precisely prepares to unleash a truly devastating magical spell. Whispering a single commanding word, she explosively releases her incredibly potent pent-up arcane power. The overwhelming magical force completely obliterates the heavy iron lock in a blinding flash of raw destructive energy. Stepping confidently over the shattered metal, she boldly strides right out of her ruined dark prison. Slipping flawlessly through the shadowy corridors, she moves with the lethal and silent grace of a master assassin. Summoning a blazing sphere of flame, she casually ignites the surrounding environment with a powerful fireball. Smiling fearlessly into the bright flames, she proudly declares her true unchained identity as Zarind. Leaving her past totally behind, she ignites the grand estate while panicked servants desperately scream for their oblivious master. Annoyed by the sudden chaotic disturbance, the arrogant master angrily demands to know the exact cause of the frantic shouting. Trembling with absolute, unfiltered terror, the breathless servant violently gasps out an urgent message regarding the young lady. Shattering the master's entire arrogant reality, the servant horrifyingly reveals that Rosalind has completely and utterly vanished.